exactly, or in interesting ways, who gets to talk about love, and in what way, and to whom, and what counts as truth and knowledge and what doesn't. And of course, I love pushing these boundaries. So it seems that disciplinary boundaries in the academy are very important when it comes to the specific topic of love. It seems that in religious studies, in theology, in certain kinds of philosophy, in certain kinds of literary studies performed in certain ways, in the academy, these things have always been talked about in certain ways. But in contemporary theory, especially in materialist-informed critical theory and feminist theory, it's been another story. So I think there is a shift now. I think that we're able to start seeing an epistemic shift, but I still find it very, very interesting, and I do push people's boundaries sometimes when they come up to me and say, so what do you do? You know, so what do you research on? And I get my, I'm working on love. And to see what happens. And I actually find the response sometimes as interesting as actually doing the academic work on love. Especially I do embodiment studies, so what's the body saying about what they think? So it seemed to me that within contemporary theory generally, and feminist theory more particularly, the subject of love usually evokes embarrassed responses, similar to what the formerly taboo topic of sex used to elicit. However, unlike the discourse of sex, which evokes the excitingly risque and the politically transgressive, the topic of love tends to suggest a conservatism, or even a denial of politics, not to mention an aura of naivete, sentimentality, religiosity, and sometimes a little flakiness. I'm happily partnered now, but try talking about this stuff as a single woman in her mid-30s. Desperate, right? So there's all sorts of baggage around doing this kind of work. Yet love is something that most people will admit is of enormous concern to them in their personal lives. But as Bell Hooks has observed, while people may long to talk about love, there is a lack of public discussion about the topic. That is, except in popular culture, where it is widespread, as I've mentioned, but there are limitations. Yet this theoretical aversion towards love in academia has not been a constant one. For instance, Lucerie Garay reminds us of its importance in the history of Western thought when she underlines that Sophia, or the wisdom of love, is perhaps the first meaning of the word philosophy. Meanwhile, Che Guevara made the compelling, although problematic, claim that love is central to political engagement. As he famously claimed, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that a true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. It was anarchist Emma Goldman who made this sentiment central to her specifically feminist context when she argued that the demand for equal rights in every vocation of life is just and fair, but after all, the most vital right is the right to love and be loved. Indeed, if partial emancipation is to become a complete and true emancipation of women, it will have to do away with the ridiculous notion that to be loved is synonymous with being a slave or subordinate. So we start asking the question, what is love, which is very difficult to answer. We start then answering, what is not love? And what's very interesting to me is how many times theorists who have started to look at love don't take on capital L love entirely, they start looking at its parts, right? So we have C.S. Lewis and his 4 loves. He divides it into storge, philia, eros, and agape, affection, friendship, or passion, charity. There are feminist theorists who don't look at love, but they look at the ethics of care. So how is care love? Or is it a part of love, or is it not quite love? So it's always this question of parts. Are these synonyms? Are they different parts of love? Do the parts make a whole? Or are these very, very different things? So I always love Google image. It makes it immediately. So when I was teaching a course on theories of love, we started with kind of the main theories of Western love, and just started to look at images of what it is that we circulate in terms of how do we represent love? Are all of these different kinds of things the same thing? One thing that I and some of my colleagues who are doing this kind of work are finding interesting, we start talking about love, 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 but what do we mean? Are we glossing it sometimes as affection or sometimes friendship? In fact, it seems to me the default always seems to be romantic love. People talk about love generally, but what they really mean is romantic love. And there's some really great feminist work right now about this question of, you know, is that love? Who's in love with who? Is that anything we want to name as love? Interesting spatial questions we need to look at. Where is love allowed? You know, public, private. Where is love located on your body? And temporal questions. I found my students were very interested in this question. How long does love have to last to be called love? Right? If you stop loving someone, was it love? Can you promise to love someone if that subject keeps changing? So, yeah, they have a lot of interesting things to say about that. Coming back to some of the questions I've already talked about are interesting issues of love and representation. One that I find really interesting is this question of communication. Do you mean the same thing I do when you say you love? Right? So when I say I love you and they say I love you, are you actually talking about the same thing? How do you know? How can you ever know? As my colleague suggested, does talking about love destroy it? A lot of theorists of romance narratives suggest that love is nothing but representation. There is no such thing as love, except for as we discursify it. We produce love by saying love.
In fact, as I came in tonight, I tweeted the fact that I was going to be here sharing some time with you and talking about sincerity and emotion in media. And I said my goal is to prove two things. A, that we are sincere people and that journalists have feelings too. And in the time that it took for me to start my talk, somebody tweeted back at me saying, good luck with that. So that is the situation I find myself in as I address you here tonight. When it comes to the emotions that are involved in media, there are two sides to this. There is the emotion of the reporter or the journalist, him or herself, and there are the emotions that we elicit in you, the listener, the viewer, or the reader. And there are two primary emotions that we will elicit from you. One of them is fear. I hate to say this to you, and it's going to be blunt like this throughout the presentation. It gets worse, so prepare yourself, okay? But this is how it works in our industry. And I say fear because that's what it comes down to. For example, we reported a story in this community 10 days ago now, maybe less, about a murder in downtown Kitchener, right? It's behind a high school in downtown Kitchener. So we, as the media, will express to you, either through written word, on the radio, through stories and pictures on TV, that somebody has been stabbed to death in downtown Kitchener. Well, how does that make you feel? Are you going to be a little more fearful of that particular area? Are you going to be a little more fearful of your city as a whole because, oh my gosh, these things happen? Yes, bad things do happen, and I'll go back to Gary Gnu, who said, no news is good news. Well, we have an obligation to report it to you, and it will elicit that emotion in you. The other one is anger. When we tell you, for example, that federal MPs have conducted lavish trips for which they have expensed tens of thousands of dollars for caviar or limousines, or how about Bev Oda and some hotel rooms, right? I mean, we can go through any manner of things, and your reaction to that story is going to be one of anger. How can somebody do this to us? And then the flip side of it, why is the media telling us this? This is making me angry. But again, we, as the media, feel as though we have an obligation to share that information with you. And I do believe that we do. I don't think it's just something that we feel. I think that you have a right, as a taxpayer in this democracy, to know that. And we have, again, the right to hold power to account. So those are the two primary emotions that we will elicit in you as a consumer of media. And we come by these things rather honestly. Believe it or not, when we do focus groups and case studies and we survey people about what they want to know about when it comes to their news media, we find an overwhelming number actually get a strange sense of comfort in hearing those stories that initially make them afraid. It's a really bizarre phenomenon, but if you think about, again, we'll use that murder in downtown Kitchener as an example. While it initially might make you afraid of that neighborhood, or might make you second guess your city, when you step back from it and you look around your own neighborhood, or you hear further details about the story, how police are conducting this investigation, or maybe there is a greater patrol in a given area, suddenly you take comfort in that. It didn't happen to you. You may be 6 degrees separated from it. So it's a really interesting thing. And it goes the same with anger. Once you get over the initial response to it, you're happy that you were told, because you believe that you have a right to know. And perhaps when election time comes around, you'll be happy that you knew that. Journalists are people too. And sometimes emotions show up as we are doing our job.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
The landing on the moon presented an interesting emotional challenge for me. I had just as much time to prepare for that landing as the space program did.
30 seconds.
I'd watched it from the beginning.
30 feet, 2.5 down. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Oh, boy. And yet, when that vehicle landed on the moon, I was speechless. Boy,
Okay, we're going to be busy for a
I
minute.
really couldn't say a thing.
Stories affect us, again, I'm using the collective we, as journalists as well. And put yourself in the time, right? Man lands on the moon. Walter Cronkite delivering the news. He's supposed to be all stoic and professional, all of these different things. And note too how the glasses came off. You've probably all heard of the Hippocratic Oath. There is no such thing as the journalistic oath. I personally believe there should be, or maybe could be. And I'm not alone in that. Many have suggested the same. So I worked on one myself that I've written to give you an idea of where we are coming from. And this is the truth when it comes to sincerity in what we do. We really do have the most noble of intentions. So if there were to be a journalist's oath, it would go something like this. I swear to present the facts, and nothing but the facts, while expressing no emotion, and not allowing my personal feelings about the story to affect the way in which I present it. I will pursue those facts, regardless of the consequences their discovery may have on me, so that I may share the truth with my listener, my viewer, or my reader, and allow them to formulate their own opinion. I vow to double-check the accuracy of all of my facts, so as not to unjustly accuse someone of wrongdoing, while also protecting my employer against the potential for litigation. Should I fail to adhere to this oath, I swear to turn in my media credentials and my access to the press club immediately. So help me God. Again, it doesn't exist, but if it were to exist, that's how I would word it.